Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is The Amazing Spider-Man issue 4 from September of 1963. This issue marks the first appearance of longtime Spider-Man villain the Sandman, as well as the double debut of two of Peter Parker's early love interests, Liz Allen and Betty Brant. The issue was written by Stan Lee and drawn by Steve Ditko. Our story begins as Spider-Man is patrolling the nighttime streets of New York City. While the wall crawler is keeping his eye open for any crime afoot, he can't help but notice a billboard advertising a new series by J. Jonah Jameson called The Spider-Man Menace. Despite the hero having saved the life of his son only 3 issues ago, the shrewd publisher of the Daily Bugle still considers Spider-Man a dangerous outlaw and has never shied away from expressing his outrage that the hero is loose on the streets. Spider-Man brushes off the billboard as he notices 3 shady figures casing a jewelry store. As the men hastily approach the store to rob it, Spider-Man fashions 3 lassos out of his webbing and ties up the would-be robbers. Yet as Spider-Man confronts the 3 men, one in a particularly dapper green suit speaks up and rightly points out that they haven't yet committed any crimes, meaning Spider-Man has no legal right to have apprehended them. While it's obvious the 3 men were indeed about to rob the jewelry store, Spider-Man realizes they're right and is forced to let them go. Yet the 3 men aren't satisfied with being released and start obnoxiously yelling for a policeman to arrest Spider-Man. One quickly arrives on the scene and orders Spider-Man to stay put as he conducts an investigation, but of course the teenage hero flees to a nearby rooftop instead, at least having learned a valuable lesson about rushing into things. Resting for a moment on the rooftop, Spider-Man once again sees J. Jonah Jameson's billboard and blames the impassioned publisher for tainting his reputation, both among the public and the criminal element. Spider-Man angrily decides that he's had enough of Jameson's libel and heads off to confront the publisher personally. Yet Spider-Man arrives at Jameson's office only to find it empty. Nonetheless, our hero opts to leave a souvenir for Jameson, although it isn't clear what the souvenir is just yet. In any case, Spider-Man heads back outside onto the streets of New York City, where he notices several police cars surround a nearby building. In a twist of sheer luck, Spider-Man watches as the suspect the police are after climbs a ladder onto the building's roof. Spider-Man decides to confront the suspect, expecting him to just be another common crook. With the spider signal introduced in the last issue, Spider-Man announces his presence and begins approaching the mysterious figure. Yet the wall crawler is surprised to see that this crook isn't the slightest bit afraid of him. Spider-Man suspects that there's more to the man than meets the eye and asks who he is. The crook tells Spider-Man that he's the Sandman, a name that our hero has evidently heard before. It turns out that this crook is wanted throughout the country, a fact that Spider-Man realizes as he attempts to apprehend him. Yet amazingly, the Sandman's torso seemingly disappears from within Spider-Man's grasp. But no, the Sandman has not disappeared, he's only manipulated the molecules of his body, all of which have somehow been transformed to sand. Needing just a bit more proof of the Sandman's astonishing powers, Spider-Man attempts to punch the menace square in the chest, but the hero's fist travels straight through him. Yet the Sandman reveals that just as his body has become as powdery as a mere heap of sand, it can also become as hard as ancient sandstone. The Sandman decides he's had enough of Spider-Man's meddling and punches the hero straight in the face. But the Sandman never even raised a fist, as the blow came from his torso, which he transformed into a powerful battering ram. Spider-Man is knocked aback by the punch and discovers that his mask has been torn, exposing his face and secret identity for all to see. While Spider-Man thinks he can still apprehend Sandman using his webbing, the thought of his identity being exposed is too much for him to handle, and he flees the scene. With Spider-Man gone, the Sandman returns back to his evil scheme as he effortlessly transforms his body into weightless sand, which gently descends down onto the city streets. There the Sandman reforms back into his human figure and travels to a nearby bank where he encounters a well-crafted lock. Yet the device is of no concern to him, as he is easily able to transform one of his fingers into the exact shape of the key needed to open it. Now inside the bank, the Sandman transforms into a flat sheet of sand and, without tripping any alarms, slithers past the building's security features and into the vault. Before we can witness any more of the Sandman's heist, the issue shifts focus back to Peter Parker as he tries his best to mend together his torn mask. Hardly a talented seamstress, the young hero painfully pricks his finger with a needle as an eye-catching local news bulletin appears on the TV screen before him. The bulletin warns of the Sandman's presence within the city and offers a recounting of his origin. We learn that the Sandman was once an escaped convict named Flint Marco. While Marco was able to evade the authorities for some time, the daring inmate was ultimately forced to hide from the law within an atomic testing center in the middle of the desert. Yet Marco unknowingly walked into the center just as a nuclear device was being tested. The device released a torrent of radiation upon Marco, which somehow fused his molecules with that of the sand beneath his feet, creating the menace now known as the Sandman. The bulletin continues on, but Peter doesn't have a chance to listen, as he hears his Aunt May approaching his room. Peter shuts off his television and shudders to grab a coat to conceal his Spider-Man costume. The teenager is just fast enough, as he puts on the coat right as his loving aunt brings him a tray of milk and cookies, as she evidently thought he was hard at work studying. Yet Aunt May notices how tightly Peter is clinging to his coat and assumes he has a fever. Peter indulges his aunt's motherly instinct and feigns sickness, so she will leave his room and bring him medicine, an opportunity for him to finish watching the pressing bulletin. Peter does just that and turns his television back on, but finds that the bulletin has been replaced with live footage of the Sandman's bank heist. Despite being surrounded by police, we see the Sandman casually walks out of the bank with a bag of stolen money. The police open fire on the villain, but the Sandman only smiles for the camera as their bullets have no effect on his indestructible body. A few minutes later, Peter has resigned to his bed, pretending to be sick as his Aunt May wishes him a good night's sleep. Meanwhile, the Sandman is being vehemently pursued by the police, but the clever crook is able to elude capture by turning a corner and transforming his body into a seemingly harmless mound of sand, one that also conceals the money bag he stole. The pursuing policemen are none the wiser and run right past the villain. The next morning back at the Parker residence, we see Aunt May taking her nephew's morning temperature. Having had no fever at all, the caring aunt declares that Peter's sickness has passed and leaves his room to make him some breakfast as he gets ready for school. With his aunt gone, Peter reveals that he had worked on his mask throughout much of the night and has managed to repair it fully. Peter opts to wear his full Spider-Man costume under his street clothes as he leaves for school, but not before telling his aunt that he'll be late coming back, as he has plans to see J. Jonah Jameson, although he's scant on specifics. We then shift focus to the publisher himself, as he arrives for work and demands a story be written about the Sandman's recent exploits. It's at this point we learn that the souvenir Peter had left Jameson the night before was a sticky coating of webbing all over his office chair. The publisher immediately recognizes the prank as the handiwork of Spider-Man and angrily orders his secretary Betty Brant to retrieve for him a spare pair of pants, as the ones he's wearing are now ruined. Betty goes to retrieve the clean pair of pants for her boss, yet oddly runs into Peter Parker. The budding photographer evidently changed his mind and decided to visit J. Jonah Jameson before heading to school, not after as he had told his aunt. In any case, Betty hands Peter the pair of pants to give to Jameson, as she doesn't want to face him while he's in such a bad mood. Peter agrees and heads into Jameson's office, where the publisher asks for new photographs. Peter tells Jameson he doesn't have any, and we learn that he's come to the Bugle to ask for an advance on his paycheck, as he needs the money to fund experiments on his webbing. The already irate publisher snaps at Peter for expecting an advance without producing any photos, and the teenager quickly leaves to catch the last bus to school. As Peter arrives at school, he walks past two of his classmates, Flash Thompson and Liz Allen. Amongst themselves, Liz tells Flash that after having repeatedly rejected him, she's finally agreed to go on a date with Peter. Liz then approaches Peter and asks him when he's going to pick her up for their date that night. Yet we see Peter has completely forgotten about his plans with Liz and tells her he's going to be too busy studying that night to make them. Liz rightfully scorns Peter for offering such a bad excuse and leaves in frustration. Peter laments how much of a strain Spider-Man is putting on his normal life, as his preoccupation with the Sandman is really what's taking up all his time and effort. Speaking of the villain, we see that not too far from Peter's school, the Sandman is once again being pursued by police. While the lawmen have no way of capturing the menace, their endless game of cat and mouse is wearing him down. The Sandman spots Peter's school from afar and decides to rest there. Inside the school, we see that Peter's inattention hasn't gone unpunished, as the outwardly meek teenager has been forced to carry a box of old bottles from a laboratory to the school's boiler room. Peter arrives at the boiler room and runs into a janitor, who offers to take the bottles off of Peter's hands as he adjusts the settings on a new king-size vacuum cleaner. A floor above, Sandman is pacing the hallways looking for a safe place to rest, yet he's nearly spotted and rushes into the nearest room to avoid detection. Unfortunately for him, Sandman happens to walk into a crowded classroom in the presence of the school's principal. Facing the esteemed professional, the Sandman oddly demands that he forge him a high school diploma, as the criminal had never graduated. Yet even in the face of several threats, the brave principal defies the Sandman, as he's sworn by an unwavering oath of academic integrity. The Sandman doesn't take kindly to this, and decides he's gonna teach the class a lesson about what happens when his will is defied. Holding the principal steady and cocking back his fist, the Sandman is ready to pummel the old man. But Spider-Man suddenly appears in the room and delivers his own lesson straight to the Sandman's jaw. The Sandman quickly recovers from the punch, eager to resume his fight with Spider-Man from the night before. Yet the wall crawler knows his first priority is securing the safety of the students watching, so instead of throwing another punch at the Sandman, the clever hero performs a wrestling move that tosses the villain clean out of the classroom. While most of the students cheer on Spider-Man's incredible display, Liz Allen worries about Peter Parker, as to her he is nowhere to be found. Peter's perennial heckler Flash Thompson disregards Liz's concern, as he thinks Peter is probably just hiding somewhere like a coward. With an epic battle now unfolding in the hallway, the principal has the chance to order an evacuation of the school. Yet the superhuman struggle doesn't remain in the hallway long, as Spider-Man realizes that against the Sandman, he's at a disadvantage in tight spaces. Our hero lures his foe to the school's gymnasium, where he perches himself atop a basketball backboard and encases the Sandman in a tomb of webbing. Yet even the smallest openings allow the villain to effortlessly pour through the trap. Spider-Man tiredly flees the gymnasium, but the Sandman is hot on his trail and manages to corner the hero. Spider-Man desperately hurls his fist towards the Sandman's chest, but his hand and arm goes straight through the villain. Spider-Man motions to pull his arm back from within the Sandman's torso, but finds that his foe has become as hard as stone, effectively trapping him still. Realizing he's caught Spider-Man in a deadly trap, the Sandman decides he's had enough fun punching the wall crawler, and opts for his next blow to be a powerful headbutt. Spider-Man painfully reels from the strike, knowing he's on his last leg, but musters just enough strength to hurl the Sandman's head into an iron post. The impact seemingly destroys the Sandman's head, and the rest of his body soon turns into a puddle of loose particles. Yet Spider-Man's moment of reprieve is fleeting, as the Sandman quickly reforms his body as though it had never been struck. Tired of Spider-Man's meddlesome speed, the Sandman turns his own legs into quicksand and envelops our hero, once again trapping him still. While seemingly doomed, Spider-Man was smart enough to curl up into a ball, which he's able to roughly maneuver down a large flight of stairs. Several harsh impacts shake Spider-Man free from the Sandman's clutches and into the school's boiler room. Yet for all of the hero's effort, the Sandman hasn't taken even an ounce of damage and quickly recovers to strike back at Spider-Man. But the Sandman is taken aback and somewhat amused as the wall crawler confusingly grabs a nearby drill and warns the villain of its incredible power. The Sandman is hardly intimidated and even turns into loose sand to prove just how powerless the drill is against him. Yet this was all part of Spider-Man's plan, as the hero lunges past Sandman and switches on the industrial vacuum he had seen the janitor tinkering with earlier. With a vacuum in hand, Spider-Man is finally able to defeat his seemingly unbeatable foe, as each and every one of Sandman's bodily particles are sucked into the vacuum and trapped in an inescapable canvas bag within. While Spider-Man is elated to have ended the menace of the Sandman, he can't help but be disappointed that he wasn't able to get any photos for the Daily Bugle in the process. Yet the clever photographer comes up with a quick solution, as he sets his camera on a timer and grabs a bucket of sand used to smother flames. Tossing a mess of sand in the air, Spider-Man leaps through it in a flashy fighting pose, as if he was fighting the actual Sandman. While the hero is taking his photos, we see that the future publisher of them, J. Jonah Jameson, has arrived at the scene of the school. Finding it surrounded by police, Jameson angrily questions why the lawmen haven't entered to confront the Sandman. A policeman tells Jameson that they're waiting for confirmation that the school has been fully evacuated. Eager to see both the Sandman and Spider-Man apprehended, Jameson stubbornly waits outside with the police. Yet as soon as they get the go-ahead to enter the school, Spider-Man appears outside and lets the police captain know the Sandman's been subdued. The captain calmly asks Spider-Man to join him in making a full report of the event, but the hero's distrust of the authorities and Jameson's endless whining give him reason to flee. But not before safely handing over the Sandman within his canvas trap. Spider-Man heads back into the school and quickly changes into his civilian garb. As Peter Parker here runs into J. Jonah Jameson and hands the grateful publisher the photos he was able to stage as Spider-Man. As cordial as we see Jameson be with Peter, the next two panels show just how much rage the publisher holds towards Spider-Man, as he once again blames the hero for the day's fiasco. With the Sandman defeated, Peter confidently struts back into class and tells Liz he can make their date after all. But at this point Liz wants nothing to do with Peter and has already made plans with Flash Thompson instead. A smug Flash rubs this into Peter's face, causing the beleaguered teenager to snap and lunge at him. Yet Peter recognizes the responsibility he has and restrains himself from accidentally pummeling Flash with his super strength. Walking away from the would-be brawl, Peter is mercilessly heckled by Flash and his pals for chickening out. Even Liz mocks Peter for being a so-called coward, although she does press Flash when his harassment goes too far. Walking home from school, Peter's despair is made even worse as he overhears several streetgoers brand Spider-Man a menace. The issue subsequently ends as we see Peter alone in his bedroom deep in thought as he struggles to reconcile his two lives. Yet as much as he knows it will cause him grief, Peter buckles down and swears to continue serving the streets of New York City as the Amazing Spider-Man. Well, that concludes our story for today. Marvel has appended 2 letter pages at the end of this issue. For those unaware, letter pages were once hallmarks of the comic industry in an age before the internet. They gave Marvel an opportunity to respond to the praise, criticism, and suggestions they'd received about their stories. All of the letters presented in this issue were sent by mail to Marvel almost 60 years ago. While most letter pages present opinions regarding the preceding issue, these 2 pages actually cover Amazing Spider-Man issue 2. While I will not be reading the letter pages aloud, please take a moment to look and see what readers of the time thought of issue 2 of this series. It's certainly an interesting experience all these years later. And with that, we've concluded Amazing Spider-Man issue 3 and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was another great story, roughly on par with issue 3, which some of you might recall, was my favorite of the series up to that point. One gripe I do have though, is the similarity between the 2 issues. Both stories essentially focused on our hero's struggle against a seemingly unbeatable foe, born from a freak accident, only to eventually best them, not with brawn but with wit. While I admit that the formula worked well for these 2 issues, I am a little worried that the trope will get stale, especially considering some of the villains I know Spider-Man is yet to face. But one difference and improvement from this issue over the last was its handling of Peter Parker's personal life. For the last 3 issues we pretty much just saw Peter get hassled by Flash Thompson, brush it off or faintly rebuke him, and let the cycle repeat. This issue changed things up a bit with Peter and Flash's near fight, yet as much as Peter, and perhaps us readers wanted to see Flash get beat up, the writers had enough restraint to have Peter back down and accept the blow to his already weak reputation. This was the right decision to make, and I think it's an indication of why this series is so special, as it's important to show that even a hero as amazing as Spider-Man still struggles with a personal life like the rest of us do. With that being said, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.